All of us have something in common. We all do too much thinking, especially in our society. Especially when we're at a time when nothing is certain. Real estate is not a certain investment that will allow us to retire in 10 years, as many people were able to do in the 1970s and 80s, at least up through about 1987, 88. There's no longer any job that's absolutely certain that you'll be able to have it indefinitely for life, with cost of living increases that outpace inflation. There's no relationship that is any longer so certain that you can simply take it for granted, nor should you. The trouble is, for too long, we took everything for granted. We lost respect for a lot of the things that we should have been paying attention to and working on. I live on a farm and also have a ranch. And one thing that you do when you are working with nature, you take nothing for granted. You can plant a field, along comes a storm, washes out your seeds. Things start to grow, along comes a windstorm, out goes your seedlings. Just before harvest, an infestation of insects, and your crop is gone. You don't work on your machinery as you use it, it breaks down. All across America, lessons that could and should have been learned, and at one time were, are no longer being focused on. So what I want to do in the 2 hours we have now is I want to focus on some of the lessons we can learn that allow us to fundamentally change our life, so we stop all the chatter up here and we simply have a life. We simply go out and engage in life without all the analytical double talk, without all the confusion. Now I have a chart here, and don't worry about not being able to see the chart. I'll go over each of the points with you. But I don't like just a static lecture. I like an interchange. So at any time that you have ideas, suggestions to add on to anything I'm saying, please feel free to engage in that, because I'm always interested in what you're thinking as well. Let's begin, and we won't necessarily get through all these because I generally plan far more than what I can give in one particular talk. But there is no one single place that's accurate for everyone to begin. But let's assume that everybody has some basic problems. And I want to address some of the most common of the problems and what I consider realistic and reasonable solutions to them, or at least getting beyond that. By the way, in asking everyone before we started our talk what your professions were, did you notice that we had no physicians here? I think that's interesting. Rarely, if ever, at any of my lectures, and I do over 150 lectures a year, with groups as small as 100 or as many as 5,000, I won't have 2 to 3 physicians a year. I rarely have professors, architects, people in certain professions. And we'll try to get to that later, why those people generally don't come to these kind of workshops. First, ask yourself, when is the right time to change? If you don't ask yourself that, then you'll never change. We have to begin with certain premises. Nothing just happens by itself. All right? You've heard the adage that, well, things will get better. You know, things will change. Well, what does that mean? What things? You are it. If you don't actively construct a program that allows you to go from here to here, you're not going to get there. You must have a program. But you have to be the architect of it. I can't be that. No one else should be. You can have support from other people, but it's your responsibility. When people come out on a Sunday to Central Park to learn about training for the marathon, we teach them in increments. In other words, once you've achieved 1 month's worth of training and you're able to hold yourself at that 1 month training, only then do we take you forward. Some people just like to go right on, and they burn out, just as people do in all other areas of life. They don't honor some of the older tradition of mastery of life and apprenticing. Go to other cultures and they don't have weekend workshops of getting in touch with the real self instantaneously and spontaneously. They devote lifetimes to this. Then again, look at them. In the midst of poverty and chaos, in the midst of war and devastation, most of those people are still able to understand the purpose and meaning of life and find purpose and meaning where we would be completely chaotic in our mental thinking and traumatized, because they've learned how to maintain balance no matter what the travesty around us. We have any kind of problem, we go to pieces. then that becomes all we think about is the problem. And we forget about our life. So our problems become more important than our life. And then we start thinking about our problems and we can't get into life. So my suggestion is that you, at very first place we start is making the time right. Now, if you think the only time to start is after a diagnosis of something, for instance, you're finally being told your job is being eliminated, that's the wrong time. Now you have a breast that has a lump in it. You have a prostate that's cancerous. You have a colon that's got a tumor. You got heart murmurs or arrhythmias. You got arteries that are clogged. You are so overweight, your blood pressure so high, that you are forced to go on a diet. That is changing by someone else's idea of what's right for you. That rarely is going to make a difference to most people, because then they're changing out of fear and not, instead of a respect for life. They will only change, I have found, generally speaking, to the degree that a doctor or someone else states, this is what you must do right now to save your life, or to improve your life, or to change your life. But you're allowing someone else to tell you and motivate you. You're not doing it within yourself. And ultimately, any changes to be meaningful and sustainable must come from within, not outside. And yet we have manufactured an enormous industry in servicing other people's problems, whether it's different cultic groups. Right now, there are over 5 million Americans, it's estimated, involved on a daily basis in cultic practices. Most no longer are like a Moonies group or something that is that obvious. Most embrace things that on the outside seem reasonable. You know, the one heart movement, the one mind movement, the one world movement. But ultimately, they're still cultic practices. They're coming up with an idea that this is the way life is, this is the way it should be, and they try to look at all the things that don't work in your life and show you that that way will make everything work. It still is taking you away from the empowerment within yourself. A truly conscientious way of growing is where you create it. You have to create it all. If you start waiting for someone else to create it for you, you will never be able to sustain it. All you will do is be obedient in showing someone else, see what I did? I ate the right food. See what I did? I exercised. See what I did? I did my meditations. I did my chants. I did my yoga. I did my service to community. Now, why? Did you do it because you wanted to do it? Were you honoring something in here? Or because you were being recognized out there by some father figure, mother figure, superior figure, religious figure that was validating your existence? Is that the parental figure that you didn't have as a child, and now as an adult you have it? And do you think these are uneducated people who are going into these cults? Not at all. The uneducated people are too smart for that. Huh? Give me a streetwise person any day of the week over any PhD and any baby boomer who is lost in their own mind. Because one has no idea how to survive outside of their specialization. The other person can survive anywhere at any time because they've had to hustle to survive. So they don't believe in most of the stuff that they get thrown at them. Someone else needs desperately to believe, desperately. And when you need anything that much to validate your inner emptiness, then you're willing to make any sacrifice that you would never make in your regular job. And that's why when we saw Rajneesh with 99 Rolls Royces lined up and mounds of cash in his bank account, and everybody out there living in a communal setting, and you started saying, well, what do? I'm a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, and doctor, a stockbroker, I made millions, where'd you give it? Now I gave it to him, I don't want it, I want it, he can have it. And he says, I am just for the spirit. Okay, well then give all that money that you got and all those Rolls Royces, give it to some charity and let someone do something good with it. Nobody could see that what they were doing was trying to buy themselves some instantaneous karma rebalance. And of course, he came, he went, and those people are the same. So it doesn't work looking out there. So don't wait until the diagnosis is so serious that you're being forced into making change. And don't wait until all else fails. Think how many times in a relationship you have gone to a person to share something and then realized that all you were getting in return was negativity. The person was not honoring you as a human being, probably denigrating you or using you or abusing you on some level. And yet you continue to think, well, it's got to get better if I keep changing. And so finally you change to where you have edited out everything that has a resemblance of anything that's natural to you. But now you don't have all the hassle, but you're not you. You're the person that this person won't get angry with. Well, that's when all else fails. You make yourself over into something that is pleasing to someone else, but it isn't you. Don't wait till that point. Why now? Why should you begin to change now? And you have to answer that. If you removed your masks, who would you see? Everyone has a mask. Some have many masks. What you do is you spend your life perfecting the mask, the image. You're an image consultant. How many people have you come across that want to look a certain way, want to talk a certain way, want to be a certain way, want to have a certain presentability, want to have a certain acceptability? What if it's not them? What if they're an altogether different person? But they know in the world we live in today that there's a certain way you have to be acceptable. Right? What if you had that mask your whole life? Maybe you developed it earlier on when you started being yourself as a kid and you got that lesson real quick. As a kid, you better adapt to what the parents' needs are, not your own. For every positive lesson a child is taught, they are taught 30 negative lessons for every one. In school, for every positive lesson a child is taught, they're taught over 20 negative lessons that are self-limiting. Well, it doesn't take long when you've been taught so many times you can't do something and you're not smart and that's not right, and that there's going to be a punishment if you persist in it, then you think, okay, I can't fight this, I'm too little and I'm too vulnerable, so I'll simply change. And so you start to appease. But inside, you've already mastered the process of making molds. You'll act a certain way for each of the people that are necessary for you to survive. And then one day, the mass becomes like a virus in the cell, a geome that becomes a part of the cell. The DNA matches the DNA of the cell. You cannot differentiate virus from self. So there's no way to kill it, to cleanse it, to get it out. Now you've got to live with this your whole life. And this is a common problem. How do you change when you've been used for so long to be in a particular way that you do not know what's real any longer? You don't know what your real needs are, what your real energy is, what your real desires are. You just know the mask. But you know something's wrong because the mask doesn't work. It still doesn't feel right. So it's in the process of just being honest, a cleansing, opening up, saying, all right, I know me, and I know the secret me, and I know the other side of me, and I know the self-limiting me, and that's the mask that I'm wearing to hide all that. We wear masks to hide. We don't wear masks to show ourselves. Ask yourself, remove the mask, and what would we hear? Would we hear the same thing, or would we hear a different person? Would we hear an obedient person or a challenging person? Would we hear a dynamic person or a passive person? Would we hear a person that wants to join something or wants to remain autonomous? It's only when you identify who you really are that you can begin to get out of your mind. That's why you stay in your mind. That's the whole purpose of being in your mind, is because it's the only place safe for you. If you felt that it was safe to come out, you would have gotten out of your mind a long time ago and had a life. So what you got instead is you got a profession, right? But it is safe out there. We've just been led to believe that it isn't. We've feared everything. And our fears are our parents' fears. And that's why they said no so many times. Now, there are appropriate things not to do in life, but if you discount out the appropriate things you shouldn't do, you're still left with about 90% of the things that you should have tried, should have done. Should have gone on and let someone experience and express. Parents didn't do it, they're not going to let you do it. Then that's what you become. When we are in our mind, it's because there's discomfort. If you were in your mind, it's not because you feel comfortable. Discomfort comes from many things, and I'd like you to focus on some of these things. And I want some feedback now as we go. Change creates discomfort. Why? Why is change creating discomfort? It's unfamiliar. We're not used to it. What else? You become insecure when you have to change. Why? It's unpredictable. You have to focus on something that's new, which means that there are no guidelines, there's no parameters. You don't know what's going to happen. You're in a new place with new feelings. And the old masks won't work in this new environment. You know, it's like wearing sunglasses into a dark room. What are you going to see? Nothing. Now you're in the dark room, the lights are going to go on, and everything's going to be new. What do you think happens when someone trains for a marathon who's never run and walked or done anything of an exercise in 40 years? Now they realize in their mind, my God, I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it. I'm in this marathon. I'm at the 10th mile, the 20th mile. It's all new. But that's how we end up facing change. We face it because we're in discomfort. People do not change because they feel comfortable. They change because they feel uncomfortable and can't bear it anymore. It is rare to find someone who has a natural process of living says, I feel so good about myself, I want to change things. Well, what do you want to change if everything works? Because I want to find something new. I want to explore different. But that's true, by the way, of artists. That's true of creative people. Creative people rarely, if ever, rest on their laurels or rest on what they've done. They write a book, they want to write another one. They paint a picture, they want to do another one. They've done one dance style, they want to do another. They direct one kind of film, they want to do another. They're always trying to recreate themselves through their life, their mind, their work. They're not afraid of change. Change is a challenge to them. But the moment you challenge it and you survive, it strengthens you. That's one of the ironies of life. And that's why if you start to look at all the things that change does, that otherwise people would say, I can't handle that. It's too stressful. If you bear with the stress and you allow the stress to come and the stress to go, you are stronger for the stress. If you don't allow yourself to go through the stress and distress, then you're weaker for it. It's like the person who gets so comfortable in bed they don't want to get out, the muscles become disused, and their immune system plummets. Where you get out and you start working the body and you stress the body, you become stronger if you do it with the right mind. Yes?
What about stress? How would you deal with stress in that type of thing?
Stress is going to be everywhere at all times in any situation. You simply have not to fear stress, but always use stress to your advantage. The difference is stress is healthy, distress is destructive. If I get into a cab coming over here and it was not air conditioned, I could have either said, oh my God, I'm going to be soaking wet, I'm going to be sweating, I'm going to be uncomfortable, I'm going to be clammy and sticky, I'm not going to be able to focus. I could have gone through all that stuff, or I could have said, oh, this is nice. I just roll down the window, let that breeze come, hit me in the face, and relax completely. Nothing's wrong with sweating. It's a natural process, especially for vegetarians like myself and others who have no body odor. But meat eaters have only drive in an air-conditioned cab, never again come here and let... So what we have to do is, it's choices. What do we want to do in a situation? Example, Gary, I'll see you at 7:30. Okay, we'll have dinner. Okay, 7:30 comes. Person isn't there. Average response, 7:31, 7:31. This person is late. They don't respect me. They're not honoring my time. My time's valuable. 7:35. I can't believe it. I'm wasting my time here. 7:45. This is it. I don't want to see this person ever again. This person's out of my life. They should rot away. They should flush the toilet and they go right down it. 8 o'clock, I'm abused. I'm hurt, I'm sick. I'm sure I'm going to get an upset stomach. I don't care who calls now on the phone, I'm not going to be nice to them. And that's what I'm going to focus on. All night long, my mind's going to be on who didn't show up for me. And I'm going to let everyone know how angry I am because I got stood up. My time's valuable, my time's important, they dishonored me. Okay? Appropriate response. 7:30, person's not here. They obviously are someplace else. It's not very complicated, is it? Okay, let me do something else with my time. Now, if the person should show up, it's okay, but if they don't, it's okay. Because you see, that person isn't what caused me to feel anxious. That person didn't cause me any stress or distress. Nobody causes you to be stressed. You cause you to be stressed because your beliefs and your attitudes are what precipitate your feelings. If you understand how feelings are created, then you can not allow people to participate in manipulating them. So come 8 o'clock, I've already enjoyed a half hour, and I'll make the best of it in whatever I'm doing and wherever I'm at. The mere fact that in a society that is very rushed and very hectic, to have a half hour just to completely relax, deep breathe, meditate, do yoga, hang out. And if the person doesn't show up at all, then I have to assume that the person simply found it inconvenient or something else, and at some point they'll get back to me. But I'm still the same. I haven't changed because I've chosen not to change. I've chosen not to overreact. And most distress in our society is due to overreaction and inappropriate reaction. So when you realize you don't have to always get yourself out of shape. You own a factory, you own a manufacturing company. How many times when the accountant says, well, you got to pay this tax, what do you mean I got, and suddenly you blow up the accountant as if it's the accountant's fault. Well, it's what happens. When I get audited, first thing I say to the accountant is, all right, worst case scenario, how much will I owe? You would owe this amount if they disallowed everything and you had to pay it. Okay, fine, I'll write out a check. Now, here's a check, and it's paid. Now, if it turns out that I don't have to pay all that amount, fine, then, you'll get me money back. But I go on with life. It's a piece of paper. It's some money. It's nothing until I make it something. Until I make the person who I walk into an office, if I own a factory, and see that they haven't done the work exactly right or they're wasting time on the phone, and suddenly I make what that person's doing so important that I disrupt my own life, my own energy, my own sense of well-being. And now I got to have things instantaneously. So I start yelling at people, making other people feel as if somehow they're not doing their work right because I can't handle myself, so I don't want anyone else to feel comfortable about themselves. Do you ever notice the person's under stress always wants to make everyone else feel distressed? They want to invade that space. You never see anybody ever coming in and say, oh, look at you. You're smiling and you're happy and you're relaxed, and I'm not. I'm terrible. I'm mainly retentive, and I may never again have another bowel movement. Could you imagine that? Look at me, nervous wreck. But I like the way you are. Teach me how you are. No, you don't have that. No, just. And yet, what we do is we allow people to try to infect us, to try to share their anxiety, their nervous energy, their problems with us. And it's not as if they share the problem and then it's corrected. You've all had this. Okay, you got a problem with this? Deal with it in this way. Next time you see them, they got the same problem. Did you ever say, by the way, what'd you do about that problem, the solution? We don't think about those things. I think about these things. When I'm running in the park this morning, I just wanted to try something different. I was telling Franco, people say things, just words that we don't pay attention to. Run by someone, hey, see you later. So then you turn around, you run back beside the person and say, when will I see you later? What time and where? Well, I didn't mean that. I mean, I see you later. Okay. Where am I going to see you later? Well, I don't think we're going to see each other later. Okay, then just say, won't see you ever again. But that wouldn't sound appropriate, right? Like, never see again. Or, how you doing? Hey, glad you asked. Let me tell you how I'm doing. I got all kinds of problems. And you do want to hear it because you ask how you doing. Well, I didn't really want to hear any answer. Oh, then you should have said, I don't care how you're doing. We have strange ways of talking. We don't even know how to communicate honestly and correctly. Telling the truth. Telling the truth creates discomfort. Why? Huh? Vulnerable. Why should vulnerability be uncomfortable? Huh? They're used to you in a certain way. They don't want you to change your image or your attitude or how they respond to you. Why? Fear of rejection, yes, and something else. Why? Why don't people want you to change? Yes. Fear of intimacy. All right, intimacy is the expression of what is most essential and honest and true within your inner being. That's true intimacy. Sex is not intimacy. We've made sex an object of intimacy. We've tried to make it a shortcut. But rarely do I find people who are honest enough to understand that true intimacy has nothing to do with sexuality, has to do with what you really feel, what you really want, what you really are in your innermost being, and have the capacity to express and open yourself up without any hesitation someone's going to use it against you. And yet how often in sexuality people say, oh, now we're intimate. No, we're physical. Big difference. It's okay to be physical. Don't misconstrue the two. But in our society, we use words and we use expressions and use behavior to get an end. Therefore, our actions are predicated upon having a goal met. That means we all have an agenda. There's always an agenda at work. And yet people say they're unconditional. Yeah. Rarely do you find anyone's ever unconditional in anything. So just telling the truth can be startling to people because they're not used to it. We're rarely ever honest with anyone. Hey, how you feel? Okay. All right? How many times you heard that? Unless you live in Miami Beach. Then you never want to ask anyone there how you feel. I made that mistake coming down an elevator. Suddenly I have 50 people around me with their aches. Oh, it hurts. Feel. My ear. Look in there. Anything in there? Never again. I just look and say, you look great. Boom, I'm out of there. And you'll look at someone, and they'll look terrible, and you say, hey, you look good. And they'll think, really? I don't feel good. If we start off always trying to be honest, but honest with sensitivity, not honest in any way that would be hurtful to someone, and just express what's in here, then right away people have a chance to accept or reject you. And isn't it better that right up front people accept or reject you based upon what you really are in here, rather than playing a game, trying to get acceptance, and then one day when they feel completely comfortable with you, boom, guess what? I'm here. Whoop. What's that? Man, you look like something emotionally that's from the movie Aliens. Well, I've been hiding this. See, I've been playing along. Now I'm working for you, or I'm with you, or I'm in your life. Now I figure now I can kind of move in. Well, why weren't you honest? Well, if I was honest, you wouldn't have me in your life, or you wouldn't have me at work, or you wouldn't want me as a friend. But you know what happens when that finally does happen? They don't want you anymore. So just be honest about everything, absolutely everything. I don't believe in secrets. No? Do you? What do you mean, not usually? Oh, now, half my life's a secret, but not usually.
I've been in my life, and now I want to get back into my head.
Yeah, good. So if we start each day with a list of the truths that we will honor that day about ourselves, then we're forcing ourselves to get into our life. We're forcing ourselves to be honest about what we are, what we feel, what we want, what we desire, the real us. Let people accept or reject us. I mean, think how many times in life you have been accepted for someone that you really aren't. And sooner or later, it's going to come out. And that's when everyone gets very bitter, and because they've been used. They've been betrayed. When you're not honest, you betray people. Oh, see, you betrayed her, right? I knew it. See? Failures. We feel discomfort out of failures. Why? Why? No, why? Why do we feel discomfort from failing?
We don't know how to deal with failure. We don't recognize failure. Because we don't want to recognize failure.
We don't want to recognize failure because it is a judgment against our self-esteem, our ego. When we were little, if we were allowed to fail and still loved, it was okay. Then we'll go up through life not fearing trying things. But if we were made to feel uncomfortable or less than acceptable for doing something wrong, what you got to see? What you got to see? Why'd you get a C? Where's there any inbreeding in my family? You should get a C. Everybody else, Bobby got an A. Why don't you get an A? Suddenly, you're no longer good unless you get an A. Now you got to do everything you can to get an A. That displaces who you are. It denies who you are. And later on in life, you'll be doing the same thing for everyone else around you. You'll be being responsible for other people. And part of that is because you were never allowed to fail and feel comfortable at failure. How many business people out there on Wall Street or every place else dealing in millions of dollars never want to acknowledge their mistakes for fear that they will be held out to dry for it? Playing with other people's money as if it were not significant to the person, the outcome. Look what we just went through. Trillions of dollars made and lost, and lives devastated. 5 million lives were displaced in the 1980 by leveraged takeover buys. Middle-class Americans who didn't play in the game but were affected by the outcome. For people who were insecure, these dilettantes of Wall Street. Think of how they manipulated. Think of how they used. Think of what came from that, the legacy. Most of that legacy we haven't even felt the full effects yet. And how many of those people were living with this fear of failure? And instead of stopping something and acknowledging wrong decision, made a bad decision, they went ahead with it. Look at General Motors. Look at IBM. Look at medical doctors. Look at all the doctors performing coronary bypass operations, and they shouldn't. And everyone in that operating room knows they shouldn't be doing it. Look at the procedures. This morning, running in the park, I had a guy come up when I just started and said that he works in a hospital, in a laboratory. And he said, Gary, I listened to the show for 15 years. He said, you can't imagine all the stuff I see going on in the hospital that everyone knows about and nobody talks about, because no one's willing to acknowledge failure because of the consequences of it, either to the doctor's ego or to their self-esteem or financial responsibility. So we pretend that the mistakes don't happen. We pretend, for instance, that a bureaucracy is needed. Look in New York City, 220-some million people. You could have probably 40,000 do the job better and be more responsive than the people who don't do anything but make life a hassle. And we act as if it doesn't matter. We act as if we haven't failed. The whole system's failed. When the only people elected to Congress and the Senate are multimillionaires, something's failed. The system's failed. You should be able, as a carpenter, as a student, you should be able to run for a legislative office also. But you can't, you're excluded. But the system's supposed to be meant to help you, but it doesn't. Bureaucracies, by their very nature, self-limit free expression and the desire of the individual. You in business, those of you who are in business for yourselves, you in your own self-employed home-based business, you know the hassles of bureaucracies. Bureaucracies should be there to help you. They're never there to help you. They're there to impose a will upon you. We all know this, but sit down to a council meeting and say that most things you're doing, most things you're funding are worthless. They don't help society. But then they wouldn't get reelected. It's a game. It fails. And we don't have people honest enough to show what fails. I'm showing you the consequences of individual behavior that is accepted collectively when whole groups of people en masse deny what fails, what doesn't work. We could change the system if individuals change, because the individual who changes and will no longer be dishonest, will no longer accept limitations, will no longer deal with the fears, those are the people who will say, let's change this now. They'll see it for what it is. Someone in the system is so much in denial and so much in avoidance that they have to continue perpetuating because they can't differentiate which is the real self. Yes, I'm a feeling compassionate legislator. I want the right things for you. Step into the other masks. But I also know that I had to say yes to you and this pack and this pack and this pack. Now I have to give you back what you gave me in the form of votes, and I have to give you back through legislative action. Or you will take away your vote, and that'll take away my office. So now it's a compromise. And we all see it. It's not that this is a mystery or a secret, but the average American's in denial. Why do you think they sit in front of a television? Why do you think all day long their lives are in their head and they don't have a life? Why do you think they either are in their head or in escape? And the escape is through some passive sport or through something else that's generally destructive or demeaning. Now, you're the only person in this room who keeps asking the same questions, and your questions are good ones, and your statements are good. But let's hear from everybody. I want everybody to participate. Now, fear. Discomfort springs from fear. The only way to deal with fear is to face it and confront it. And when you confront it, something happens. And what happens is you no longer see it for being what you thought it was. Do you ever notice that what we really fear is not the thing itself, but our expectations of what's going to happen if, and the big if? Well, yeah, I would change my job, but, then what if I don't, get the next one, and what if, and you start looking at all the consequences instead of simply saying, this is very unhealthy, I'm going to change, I'm going to prepare myself for change, I'm going to bring myself to get the tools I needed to get the job done. And that's what's going to be my focus. Instead of focusing on the tools you need to get the job done, you sit in your head and worry and complain and obsess. And the obsession is an eating obsession, sexual obsession, relationship. I know I would feel better if I had the right relationship. That's what's missing. The relationship's missing. If the right relationship were there and it was a loving relationship, then everything else would be all right. What's that telling you? That what you are by yourself is not enough. You've disempowered yourself. You've made a relationship more important than you. And our whole society does this. My God, could you imagine what would happen if a lyric for a country western song were written that was positive? I got back my house, I got back my wife, I got back my car, I got back my guitar, I got back my cowboy boots. I found my dog alive. And I did it all on my own. I love myself, my heart's fine without anybody else. But that's not the message we've been given. We've been given the idea, right, that you're nobody without somebody else. So you spend your life obsessing about the essential other, the other job, the other career, the other person, instead of looking at the best that you are and saying, it all is in here. If I'm going to heal, it's in here. If I'm going to get well, it's in here, not out there. Disappointments, guilt, loneliness, pain. Now, when we feel pain and we feel loneliness, generally that brings a person down, where all they do then is introspect about the pain and the loneliness. So what's the cure for loneliness? The other, joining, becoming a part of. So a lot of Americans spend all their time joining things, becoming a part of something. Now, that's not a judgment that's wrong, but it's why you do it. That's what you have to focus on. There are a lot of things to belong to that are very good. But are you joining it because you don't have a life without it? You take on an essential part of that image of what you belong to. During the 1960s and 70s and 80s, I saw hundreds of thousands of people who did not have a life except for the movement that they were a part of. So they took on the image of their movement, whether it was the anti-nuclear movement or anti-war movement or animal rights movement or vegetarian movement. And these people were very, very critical, judgmental, harsh, defensive, angry, a lot of masks, and always emoting something that blames something else for why their lives didn't work. Yes, society sucks, society's this, society that. Hey, friend, why don't you have a life then? You're hiding in the movements. And they were never balanced anyhow, even in the movements. What can take away, very important, what can take away your possessions? What can take away your health, your beauty, your social position, your friends, and your self-esteem? Yeah, what else? What can take all that away? Yes? Neurosis, psychosis, anxiety can take a lot of this stuff away. It certainly can take away the things that are most important. You've got a lot of neurotic and psychotic people who own a lot of stuff, so their possessions, even social position, isn't always affected. Something else can take it away. What can take it away? Huh? You take it away. You see, we keep fearing everything out there is going to, when they find out what we're really about and what's really going on in our mind and how insecure we are, we're going to lose stuff. Could you imagine how many CEOs in this country are really terrified and use power and control to keep people from ever touching them, to create an image of this omnipotent person, this dynamic warrior? And what is it in the masculine sense? Because most of the CEOs, most of the presidents in this country are men, and the women who become those, generally speaking, have the same qualities as the men. Highly dominant, very aggressive, highly protective, extremely mercenary, and they all set boundaries. The boundaries are gigantic. Do not enter, you're excluded. This is a very exclusive place. We have our own room, we have our own aura around us, the limousines, the setting at the end of the table. We ritualize this exclusivity. Well, what makes you different? So you're the head of a corporation. So who cares and so what? So what? I'll tell you what. Get Lee Iacocca and Donald Trump and Scully and Jobs and all the other top people in business, put them all out on Jones Beach today in a bathing suit and put a mask on their face, and they're just like everybody else. Same people. But we have tried to make them different because they've needed to be different. They need to be separate from us. Why do you think everybody likes to join a guild, an exclusive, an elite group that excludes everyone else? It protects their identity, protects the inner sanctity, gives them a reason to be apart from you. That way they can charge more money. Why does a person arbitrarily charge a certain amount of money for something? Because they're different. You couldn't have someone who's just like you, who lived next door to you, charging a normal amount. It's very arbitrary. It's not based upon anything that's that unique. When I hear one lawyer charging $75, another lawyer charging $500, what's the difference in the lawyers? Is it because one wins all the cases and one loses all the cases? No. Because one's an expert in one area and one's a generalist? No. It's the image. Image is everything in a society that doesn't deal with substance. And rarely do individuals in power deal in substance. Because if you look at the substance of what most people are, it is grossly flawed. Look at IBM. Look at General Motors. Look at the biggest corporations in the world. They have all failed miserably, repeatedly, but they're big enough to cover up their mistakes. Until it all crashes, and then you start seeing what these people in these companies have done. And then instead of firing them, they fire everybody else to make up for their mistakes. And we allow it. Yes?
I was going to say, ultimately the truth always wins out.
You never know the truth in any of these major places. You never know the truth that's going on because the people are working in a protected environment. If you're allowed to come into that environment, if there's a sanctity inside of that environment, it is exclusive. That's why there's guilds and groups and sacred fraternities and 500 clubs and places you can't get and I can't get. Why can't we get there? Is there some kind of communication that we're so illiterate we couldn't understand? Are these people so different that we couldn't share with them? They don't go to socialize where we socialize. They don't eat where we eat. They don't go to the beach where we go to the beach. They don't go to the parties we go to. They try to make themselves seem as if they don't want to be a part of the society. Look at them. Look at all of them. Name me one human being who runs a corporation who's a human being. Do you know anyone? From the head of CBS, ABC, Dan Rather. When did you see Dan Rather and these other people acting like human beings? Pass them in the park and they ask as if they're doing a favor to say a smile or hello to you. Or there's like a hassle. I'm important, you're not. I'm a celebrity, you're not. Don't bother me. I've seen these people. They're so damn insecure. They're terrified. And the more terrified they become that someday they're going to lose this. They're going to lose their possessions, their beauty, their social position, their self-esteem, that the grip around their psyche becomes all the more. And then the decisions they make are all the more radical and lacking in reason. Now, there was a time, however, when your banker was your next-door neighbor. There was a time when we did not have such a separation. There was a time when people were really responsible in the long term for everything they did. And you could identify with these people. Today, nobody wants to be normal. Right? Nobody wants to be like you or me. They all want to be so radically unique and different. And yet publicly, of course, to put the best spin on it, oh, they care for you, they care. No. They care for nobody but themselves. Nobody but themselves. Look at the decisions they made and look how it's affected us. Every single institution in America has failed miserably at everything it's done. Every single one. Name me one institution that has seen that its interest was put behind the public it serves. They are all with agendas, political agendas, economic agendas, self-aggrandizement. You see it, I read it in all the business publications, and these are the people who run our lives. These are the policymakers. These are the very people who will then dictate what is acceptable or unacceptable behavior. They give us the service and the products that we're supposed to want. And then we're supposed to spend ourselves into debt trying to take something that makes them richer while we get poor. And there's no safety net there of people stopping saying, hold on a second, hold on. Something's wrong with this. There's so much going on in your mind because you got a lot that you don't need. You got a lot in your life that you shouldn't have. You've got bills you never should have had. You didn't need to buy any house. Who in the hell needs to buy any house? Huh? Why do we need a house? Why do we need to get married and go have kids right away? Because someone says so? Because someone makes a profit from it. Spend, spend, spend. If the whole basis of a society is commercial pursuit, then everybody got to be spending all the time. Well, what if you started to pull that back and say, hold on a second, I don't need to keep spending on everything. I don't need to have a new fashion every time the season comes in or made to feel as if I have nothing to wear. How many times have you looked in your closet and say, I have nothing to wear? Huh? Well, why don't you try any one of those 1,500 dresses? And hey, Milda Marcus had nothing on the average American. She just had a little more. This whole obsessing about making ourselves better by something out there that we're going to buy, touch, connect into. And they're very clever of how they market it. Even MTV, very clever. The anti-social message is laden in its own commercial package. Drop out of believing in everything it's not hip. Believe in us, we're hip. Buy our this, buy our that, buy our this, buy our that. Whether it's CDs or records, whether it's perfumes or, different jeans that are torn up, you're still participating. Everybody's got an economic advantage at that level, and then we end up participating in it, and then we go crazy trying to figure out why our lives are not working, in part because all we're doing is working for a standard of living. I've rarely met anyone who wanted to de-emphasize their standard of living. Yes, Gary, I'm going to feel healthier and happier by having less. I want less money. I really do. I want less money. You do? You mean you're not overwhelmed with debt? Yeah, I'm overwhelmed with debt. I bought more than what I needed and bought things I shouldn't have had and thought I couldn't live without certain things. Now I got them, and now, you know, but I'm going to get rid of this stuff. Yeah, but how's other people going to feel about that? Well, no one's going to like that. No one likes it when you start de-emphasizing lifestyle. Well, what are you going to do with this time and energy? Well, I'm going to try to figure out why I did it and then try to figure out what I can do with my life now. If I don't have to work constantly just to make some money, then I can go out there and enjoy life, enjoy people, enjoy this country. Great places, great people. I can't do anything if all I'm doing is emoting up here about my problems. And most people's problems are the same. And it's only when you start to realize you don't have to play in everyone else's game and be manipulated by all the influences around us, but we're very, very conditioned. Now, you're going to have to take some risks. No risk, no reward. Little risk, little reward. If you want to grow and you want to change, you want your life to start happening, you got to get into the life. And the only way you can get into life is to make things different. You've got to look for the different. Whether it's a food to get off meat and go into grains, whether it's exercising where you've been a couch potato, you got to take a step, and that's a risk. Now, what risks are we going to have to face? What are some of the risks? Disapproval by your peers. Then find new peers if your ones you have now disapprove. I will never allow anyone to feel they have the right to transgress into the sanctity of my inner being and tell me what is not right for me. From little kids on, we're given someone else's message of what's right for us. At what point in life do we have the courage to say, stop everything, I really don't give a damn what you think. It's my life, keep the hell out of it. The day you do that, you got a life. Until you do, you're adapting to someone else. You're always doing something else that they want instead of what you want. You're more concerned about their approval. I had someone, there was a fellow that was coming in to the running club last year, for a number of years in fact, and he'd leave right after about 10 o'clock. And then I didn't see him for a year. And then perchance on the street one day I ran into him. I said, Vic, where you been? He said, oh, I've been hanging out. And I said, you been training? He says, well, not like I used to. Oh, I used to really love getting out there with the people. It was a lot of fun, and I felt so good. Why'd you stop? Well, my wife was very angry that I would come in on a Sunday morning and spend time with you all in the park. Weren't you with your wife every day? Yeah. Every night? Yeah. So it was just that couple hours on Sunday morning? Yeah, and I just, hey, I didn't need the hassle. But that was something important to you. Wasn't that part of you, the real you, that you wanted to be healthier and to run with people and do a marathon? Did she come to see you do the marathon? No. So she didn't support you in your efforts. Why not? Well, she's out of shape. And now that I'm out of shape, we don't argue. At that point, I'd be getting another wife. I'd be saying, goodbye, goodbye, so long, hasta la vista, forever. Man, to think, and I let it go because I didn't want to make him feel bad. To think of how many times in your life people could have given you positive support for what you needed, to been there for you, to been happy for you, instead undermined you, made you feel bad about yourself. No one has a right to make you feel bad about yourself. No one. And anyone who thinks they do, let them know they don't. Set a standard. Either you respect me or get out of my life. And I don't care who it is. If my father or my mother or any member of my family cannot respect me, they're no longer in my life. They're still my family, but they're not going to control me. It's that simple. I'm not going to allow any guilt to be used to keep me bonded emotionally to people who do not honor the spiritual nature of life. If you're not honoring health, you're honoring disease. If you're not honoring the spiritual, you are honoring that which defies and denies spirituality. Now think of that for a moment. And that transcends anything that's religious. So they either honor the spirit or they dishonor it. And don't make excuses because they're your friends or people where you work or that's the way they've always been. We seem to think that there's not going to be anyone else out there that will ever accept us for who we are and encourage us. I want to tell you, there are an awful lot of people in this country who are getting into their life and are willing to act as a support for other people who want to get into their life. We have a whole support movement in this country that's just booming. 12-step programs abounding. Why do you think those exist? Because they didn't get it from their friends and family. So they had to go out with strangers. And do you know how terrifying it is for those people to get up and acknowledge, I am an alcoholic, or I am a this, or I am a that. They're acknowledging something with openness and honesty and saying, I'm trying now to have a life. That's in the past, that's not now. And there are people saying, okay, that's all right. It's who you are now that we have to deal with. And that's where life begins. As long as it's in your head, you don't have a now. Just remember that. And you don't have a future. You only have the now when you let go of that. What events from now and the past help create your reactions to being wrong? After all, how do we know what's wrong? How do you know what's wrong? How do you know? Who told you? How much of what they told you was wrong did you find for your own experience was wrong? Much of it? How much of it wasn't wrong? All right, let me give you some big for instances. Okay? For instance, sexism. How much of male behavior was conditioned that women were sexual objects for conquest? Huh? All of it. That's a big part of human male behavior then, isn't it? So that's not a little piece. That's most interactions with women. The object being sex. Is that wrong? It's not wrong to want sex. It is wrong to use someone purely as a sexual object and not see them as a human being. If they choose to honor you by enjoying sex with you and you them, where you're not doing it for the wrong reasons, that's fine. But think of all the behavior where we are objectified. Think how many women were taught that they were nothing without men and that all they should do is try to make themselves indispensable for the man. Do the things for the man he could easily do for himself, but now you doing that he wouldn't want to do them for himself. It's common behavior, isn't it? Yeah, for most women in our society, especially those who've grown up in the last 60 years. That is not a good behavior. That's disempowering. There is no equality in that equation. Think of how many parents do for their children what the children should be doing for themselves. And the moment you don't do, you're trying to make them feel guilty by not being a good parent. And everybody wants to make you feel, why aren't you doing this? Well, because they could do it for themselves. But that's the conditioning. And think how many people are taught that it's right to go out and get a job be obedient, don't challenge authority. Even when you see something's wrong, keep your mouth shut. Is that a common characteristic? That is 99% of what everyone in this country is taught. Everybody as a whole, some rare exceptions, are taught you obey authority. Why, in the spite of the face of all the evidence, the American diet is an abomination and the primary cause of disease, have we not given up the basic 4 food group? We have study after study after study. We have epidemiological groups that show conclusively that our diet is the primary cause of disease: cancer, arthritis, heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, obesity, and yet we still are following it. That's obedience. Because any of us who stood up and challenged it were relegated out of the whole, the exclusive club. You do not break the rules in the club. You get everything of an acceptable nature in the club. Out you go when you challenge it. That's a big belief. That deals with health. So now we've dealt with health, and what about in education? We have 4 school teachers in this room. I was a school teacher. I was a school teacher, college professor. I had students that I was told I had to pass, even though they never took a test and never sat in my class, or I would get into trouble. Why? Because it was the 1970s, and because there was a movement on in the particular school, the college I was at. And the 2 students, the 2 young ladies, sat outside and talked, never came into my class, and yet I refused to pass them, and the dean passed them and let them graduate from college. And I found out they had done this with all their classes, not having to sit in a class and get passed because of fear of who's going to say what, and causing pressure in the political. And you start seeing, then what's the purpose of education? Well, how many curriculums in this country are meant to help the child survive based upon the necessity of our conditioning? Dealing with interracial issues, dealing with having a life, dealing with personal conflict. Where are these taught? And when is a student allowed or encouraged to challenge the instructor or teacher? Yeah, you're a school teacher, you know. Let a student get back a test completely different, but of their own ideas, and see how long that student stays in that class. So our education is flawed because we're not even honest about the nature of our curriculum, let alone the quality of the people who are teaching it. And even quality people who want to teach a good curriculum are forced to teach one, and by principles and ways that don't benefit the student. Just get them in, get them out. Get them the information. But what about the student that wants to learn, that wants to grow beyond some of the limitations and biases and prejudices? When I was in dietetic school, every time I'd open my mouth to challenge them when they said sugar was good, and I was told finally that I would be thrown out of class if I opened my mouth again. Yeah? Yes?
What about the student who doesn't want to learn and cuts classes and doesn't write sentences?
There are approximately 35% of the students in most inner cities who don't learn, don't attend classes, are disruptive. You have to look at that in the context of that child's background. That is not the responsibility of the teacher, nor even of the school. More often, it's the responsibility of the background where they come from. A person is going to have all of the attitude and belief from their parents. And what we are having in a society, we're not spending the effort on helping those parents who are in pain and are dysfunctional and are not good parents. Instead of helping them and seeing this is a major crisis, we go to the other end and we throw money at prisons to put these kids in jail when they end up breaking the law or doing something stupid. And that is the wrong way to approach it. Or,
I'm thinking of a bright child who just chooses to go to classes for personal reasons.
if a child is a bright kid and not antisocial or not destructive, then you have to look at what kind of program would meet that child's level of expectation. Many children are bored in class. I know kids that are far beyond the other students in the class, but they're forced to be kept back. Then you have to allow for tutorial or allow a program that will give that kid the chance to be creative in their own way. And there are a lot of kids like that today. And Yes, there are. There are many, many kids like that, where the programs have not changed to meet the needs, intellectual and creative needs of the more aspiring children. And those children shouldn't be criticized, condemned, or reprimanded. They should be given programs that allow them to excel at their level, at their pace. When those past reactions of being wrong, feeling inadequate, who makes you feel inadequate? And society. Let me give you an example. Do you know how many Native American children go on to higher education in this country? The lowest percent of any group. When was the last time you heard anything about the problems of the Native American in their educational system? The fact that we would take Shoshone, Cheyenne children and force them to learn English and take away any book or any ritual, not even allowing them to practice their native rituals. When they would start to do their own native rituals, helicopters from U.S. Forestry Service come in and disrupt their natural, their own historical rituals. We wouldn't allow them to practice that. That was the heathen that we had to remove from them. They couldn't own land off the reservation, so it was a good way of keeping them on. They couldn't get credit off the reservation, so we kept them on. Long after everyone else had the right to vote, the Native American didn't have the right to vote in this country. Forgotten. They're still forgotten. Now, that allows someone to begin to feel very inadequate. There was a woman who tried out for a movie who was Native American. She was educated, intelligent, and they said, "We got a problem. You're going to have to, can you act dumber?" And she said, "Why?" "Well, you don't fit the image that people are going to expect when they see an Indian." And she said, "No, I won't act dumb just to fit a stereotype." But let me ask you something. When was the last time you saw a Supreme Court justice that was Hispanic? Do we have any Hispanics in the room? Any of you? Any of you have a Latino background? Are Spanish people genetically different that wouldn't allow them to be Supreme Court justices? Or presidents? When was the last time you saw them featured in major motion pictures or on television in major series in real life situations? You see them as pimps, right? You see them in gangs. You see that small section of the Hispanic population, just as you see that small section of the black population that represents the worst stereotypes. Well, what about real people? Real people. You don't see them because we as a society have made them feel inadequate, and then we continue the belief system, and that is wrong. So we participate. We have a lot of ways of making people feel inadequate. What are some other ways? Your race, your age. What about age? Don't we make aging people feel inadequate? How old are you, 35? All right, see? What was the very first thing I said? Always be honest, right? In our society, if a woman starts hitting 30 to 40, suddenly her age starts changing because we make them feel inadequate, right? Of course. So every time you turn around, something is making you change the way you really are in here. Now, right here is a gentleman who is 77, and his wife, who is 74? 7. All right. I was guessing. This gentleman did the New York City Marathon how many times? Twice. Doing it now, again. I see him getting vitamin C drips to help him build his immune system, not because he has any disease, but because he wants to be maximally well. I see him trying to be as healthy as he can be as a human being. He's alert, alive, vital. Now, he's the example of what a 77-year-old human being should be. But how many 77-year-olds have been made to feel inadequate, that they're no longer an essential part of society? Intellectually, we don't call upon them. Emotionally, we don't seek their wisdom in a world of knowledge and a lifetime of experience. These are the great people of our society. These are the repositories of all that's wise. Now add in the fact that you're a minority aging person, add in that you are a double prejudice, a female aging minority person, and who comes to seek your advice? Who comes to bring you into the center of their life and their society? We exclude them, and that is wrong. And because we continue to exclude people, the mere fact that we exclude people makes them feel inadequate. It's like everybody gets picked to be on a ball game except you. That happens a couple times, you don't want to play anymore because you don't want to be rejected. We don't want to be a part of anything that's going to reject us or make us feel bad. And so we exclude ourselves frequently by assuming, well, I couldn't do that, and I couldn't do that, and I'm not good enough for that, and I'm not pretty enough for that. And we make everything so superficial. Your looks, your body, your youth. Well, what happens if you don't have the looks and body and youth, which most people don't have? Just stand on a street corner, any street corner in America, except maybe in Beverly Hills. And there, it would be normal if they didn't have all the plastic surgeons. And you'll find that people, no one's perfect. And yet we set standards for perfection that nobody can meet. Do you have any idea how many basketball players out there on the road, baseball players, football players out there on the road, terrified that the next game they're not going to do well, be booed, suddenly their value in the public's eye goes down? It's very easy to see why then they start getting themselves into, unfortunately and foolishly, dope, looking at cocaine as a way out, looking at sexual promiscuity as a way out to balance some of that uncertainty. Well, think of the things that we do when we feel inadequate. What do you do when you feel inadequate? Yeah. You eat, right. What do you do when you feel inadequate? You overeat. Who in here has sex when they feel inadequate? See? You have sex. Think of all the things that we do that are self-destructive when we feel inadequate. Then you spend all of your time in your mind. Then you have no chance of getting out and trying anything because who's going to be there to support you? Well, yeah, we would hire you, but you're not the right look or you're not the right age. You're past the age. What do you mean I'm past the age? What's that mean? Did my brain die? Can I not think anymore? Am I not vital anymore? Don't I have a whole history and lifetime? You want to hire a guy 22 and you're 55? You've got a double lifespan. You've worked in the field. You should be honoring that life. Instead, they take someone because it's cheaper. And they got a different image. They might go a little faster than you can. And so everybody starts playing the game to try to adjust to keep themselves acceptable. Well, that's terrible when you're playing by someone else's rules because you can never win. You can never win. You're now playing in their mind and yours, and you don't have a life. So every day you wake up and your life is based on fear. What am I going to do today to survive this day, to keep accepted? And when everything is so uncertain, when we're disposable of everything, disposable friendships, disposable families, disposable world, then we think we're part of that disposability. And the moment you think it, you create it. Isn't it interesting? Everything you fear, you end up manifesting. Everything. So you got to stop fearing everything. Now, obsessing. Obsessing is what leads us to be imbalanced. But some events help you obsess. Generally, you'll find that if people in your family obsess, you're obsessing. Blaming. One of those people that don't have a life because you're blaming everything else out there on why you don't have a life. People who have a life don't blame. Interesting. Once you have a life, you don't blame, you don't have fears, you don't emote, you don't look at anyone as a limiting factor because of age, race. You accept everything. Remember, every single relationship must be based upon equality. If a person is 90 and you're 30 and you want to have a friendship, you can have a friendship as long as you start off with the idea that you are both human beings. That makes you equal in your capacity to share. But if you start looking at only your differences and not your similarities, then you can't have a relationship. And now we see why we have such narrowly defined, very limited relationships. And it's foolish. Some of my best friends, in fact, for years, my best friends have been people in their 80s and 90s. Dr. Rivisi, Paul Swan, Helen Severon, the great literary writer of the 1920s and 30s. I became friends with them when they were in their 70s and 80s. And what did I share with them? Everything. Because you don't look at what your differences are, you look at what you can share equally. The passion to laugh. The trust. Do you realize all the potential you have when you have trust as the basis of a relationship? If I know that you're not going to hurt me or try to hurt me, then I would be willing to share anything. But if you fear that someone's going to hurt you or use something that you share with them against you, then what are you going to share with a person? Certainly nothing that's intimate, nothing that's essential. You're going to share the superficial, the carefully manicured, the protected. And you don't feel bonded to that person. Now men have a difficulty in being completely open with one another. Men are not conditioned to be completely honest because in a highly competitive society, men take advantage of one another. We pride ourselves on rewarding men who take advantage of others. The corporation that's able to gobble up 20 other corporations is rewarded. Now, the fact that they've displaced lives and hurt people is immaterial. That they did it was what counts. The people in our society who are the competitive athletes, as long as they win, that's all that matters. We don't like losers. Do you realize what that does to the people who then have agreed to get in and compete in that field? The fear of losing means losing self-esteem, losing respect. Look at what's happening with the Mets right now. Every single statement about them is denigrating. Why should you denigrate someone? They're trying. All right? Nothing is foolproof. And one year you praise them, the next year you condemn them, you change the pitchers, you change the players, and you wonder why these people are insecure. And we do the same thing in our own lives. So men share superficiality, but there's a deep yearning in every man to have other friends that they can have a long relationship with. And guess what? Most men have their best friendships with women that they trust. That's the irony. They will frequently tell women things they would never tell another man. I'm talking about women that they trust. And the same is also true for many women. They will open up and tell a man that they trust, knowing the man will not compete against them and not use it against them. Now that comes from someplace, and where it comes from is having seen other people use things against people. Well, the moment people start using things that you've confided in or against you, right then and there, you should pull back and say, hold on a second, I'm not going to spend the next year rethinking this 1,000 times in my mind about the fact that I shared something in confidence and you betrayed me. I'm simply going to go on. That's the choice. And when you go on, that person's still back there with their anger. The moment you engage the anger from yourself, you're staying with them. That makes no sense. I'm not going to stay where someone else. Hey, if I stay back where people betrayed me or hurt me, I'm no better than them. They win. I just got to let go and go on. And that's where you get out of your mind. Comes in, hold on, I don't want to think about that. What's going to happen if I think about it? Nothing. Nothing's good going to come from it. So I change it. And I do something positive. Now, judgmental. Being judgmental is a way of defending ourselves. Why are we able to be judgmental in a society that judges everything and feel comfortable with it? Put people down, you'll feel better about yourself. That's a terrible way to feel good about yourself, isn't it? What if you did just the opposite? What if every single interaction with anyone else, no matter how angry the other person was or how mean they were, what if instead of being angry in return, which may be what the person wants, they may be baiting you. You know, a lot of people love to bait you and get you into an argument. What if instead you offered a loving response? You took a step back, and instead of reacting, you use reason. You don't have to be a part of the general neurosis of the American society. All right? Awareness is that there's an option other than the turmoil that occurs when you have chosen not to be positive. If I see that everyone else around me is always filled with intrepidation and fear and limitation and craziness, and if I'm choosing a loving reaction, I can take a step back and say, look, you don't like me? You even hate me? That's all right. You don't know me, and if the time ever comes when you really want to know me in here, you can, and maybe you'll think differently. But it's all right. You can go ahead and have your feelings. I'm not going to have any anger in return. You walk away. It's going to make that person think. Because remember, every action is generally done to create a reaction, especially among men. You never see men just come up and slug each other. No. There's always a berating, a belittling, a denigrating. You can't hate someone until you first denigrate them. The denigration is to disempower them. Why do you think we called blacks in America in the 1700 boys? Why? They weren't good enough to be men. You see, you couldn't treat a man who you would treat as an equal with respect that you wanted to use, because you're not treating other men with disrespect. So if you stripped away his masculinity and treated him as a child, then it would give you in your mind the right to abuse him. And that's how we disempower people. Women, girls, or call them whores. You enjoyed that sex, you whore. See? It's disempowering. It's suddenly, when we say whore, everybody recognizes what that means. But when we say quack, everybody recognizes what that means. When we say charlatan, and just like the blacks were denigrated and women have been denigrated, anyone who chooses to be different and challenge the status quo is also denigrated. Anyone. Think of all the doctors right now are losing their licenses, and for their entire practice, all they've been called are quacks. They wake up every day knowing that the other 600,000 doctors out there will not come to their support. No matter how many cures they can show and how many successful cases they have, they will be thrown out. And they got to wonder, why? I'm helping my patients. If I kept with my standard treatment, I'd be hurting my patients. This doesn't make any sense. Something's wrong with this scenario. Something's terribly wrong. Why can't my colleagues in mass say, yes, if you've got 200 patients who had cancer and today they don't have it, or AIDS and don't have it, or arthritis and don't have it, let's pay attention to what you're doing. Forget the scientific studies. That's a fool's errand. That's a stupid way of dealing with this issue. Do you have patients who are alive and well and you can justify and substantiate? Yes, I do. Then you're not a quack. You're a pioneer. You're an advocate for change. It's taken courage and wisdom and an insight and persistence and discipline to do that. Let's honor that. But then what would society do if we started to honor people who challenge the very institutions that all this exclusive power comes from? It would be to share power, to share an opening. No institution is going to do it. Why do you think you don't have a female pope? Why do you think you don't have a woman in the White House? Because a woman in the White House would mean that another human being, from a different perspective, one that men do not understand, would have the control over force. Keep in mind, we have a woman in the White House, but if that woman became president, she would act like the man in the White House. we have yet to have a spiritual feminist in power in this country. And that's what has been missing. But then again, we have very few masculine spirit imbued individuals who think from the higher quality of life. If we did, we wouldn't be playing all these stupid war games. And we play a lot of them. Now, begin your own 12-step program. Here's the first ways that we can start to get out of our head. Action. First, we understand that we've got to change. Then we understand what has to change. You've got to identify those parts of your system, your mind, that are not working. You've got to identify that doing the same things you've been doing, you're just going to end up the same place you are. So let's do something completely different. Now, you can create any ones you want. I've just given these as examples. You can modify it, change it, eliminate it, add on to it. And the way you do this is you add one new thing in each month. So this is a one-year program. The key is if you start by assessing what you need to make your life work, and do it in all areas. Otherwise, what you'll do is a trick. And here's a trick that people play all the time. They will make changes in one area of their life, and that area will work. But they'll exclude everything else that doesn't work. And now they obsess on what does work. Why do you think guys work or women work nonstop at their careers and don't have time for anything else? Because they want one thing to show, see mom, see dad, see society. See, look at me. I'm okay. I mean, I'm respectful. My life works. See what I've achieved. Look at my accomplishments. Yeah, but are you happy as a human being? Well, that's irrelevant. I mean, if I was happy, I wouldn't have put all this time and energy into doing all this, to gain your approval. But what doesn't work? Well, nothing works. Well, then why don't you work on all the things that don't work? Why do you keep obsessing on what does work? When was the last time you saw someone who was successful in business who said, I've got enough, now I'm going to, have a life? That's the key. And we don't see that. Instead, they just use what they've gained to upgrade their standard of living, to make themselves seem that much more successful, that much more acceptable, that much more special. To find service and sacrifice, where do you have to look? Inside yourself. And you cannot find service and sacrifice in your heart if everyone else around you is out there looking out just for themselves, looking at the world as being a place for us to go out and take what we feel is ours. Isn't it interesting? John Wayne in 1971 in an interview said, well, we were fair with the Indians. They weren't using the land, so we took it to use it. But then again, over 150 years, we displaced every single Native American with the same mentality. It's there, it's our right to take it, and if we're stronger than you and smarter than you and wealthier than you, we'll take it, we'll own it, and you're displaced. We have done everything possible to abuse every natural resource in the world. We have adulterated everything, and only those people who have chosen to be individualistic, remain autonomous and still part of a collective society, have had the courage to say, like Rachel Carson, a great woman, and she should be recognized as one of the great philosophers of this century. She said back in 1960, she said, she's the one who coined the phrase environment. She said, it's a closed system. You can't keep abusing it and expect it not to react. And there's a finite amount of abuse that anything can take. Well, most relationships resolve themselves at the point where someone can no longer accept abuse. But why should we even take any of these abuses? Because being a part of the systems that we have, the belief systems, most people take their messages from pain. They see most things not working and think that's normal. Why do you think so many men and women get in relationships with people that are very similar to the ones that they came from in their family? Because they think that's normal, and it becomes self-fulfilling. You know and I know people who've been in abusive relationships and go right out and find another abusive relationship. We take our messages from this. But let a Rachel Carson stand alone and say, hold on, hold on. Start looking at what you're doing. Look at your sky, look at your earth, look at the robins that are dying all over the place, look at the DDT. And everybody said, no, 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 we don't want to look at this. You're crazy. No, you're wacko. And boy, did they do a number on her. They did such a negative number on her. And then look at the people who came out against the injustices. Look what they did to Martin Luther King and all the other people, water hoses and dogs, and the average American sat and tolerated it. There was no mass outpouring of indignation. Where were all the church leaders? Where were all the people who were the heads of corporations who had the power in the media to say, this is not right, stop it? You didn't have it, but that didn't stop them. And that's the power of an idea that one person, any person, is willing to persevere with. I found every single movement in this country hinges on one person at any given time. It's one person that makes a difference. So then you have to ask yourself, do you have a right to be that one person? In your own life, you better, because then you're going to be part of the mass and staying in your mind. Then you'll start to accept these conscious and cognitive, collective beliefs. And that's what keeps us in trouble. That it's okay to deal with people the way we've been dealing, or to be dealt with in the way we've been dealing. To have all the problems and think that there's no solutions, because we were told there is no solutions because the experts don't have solutions. Well, who in the world should be an expert in your life? You alone. If you became the expert in your life, I can guarantee you're going to be preventing a lot of the diseases that are going on out there, because the people who become experts don't end up with all the same diseases as everyone else, whether it's from depression or schizophrenia or a lot of other conditions. But it takes courage. That's the whole purpose of this 12-step program. You're the architect. So first you assess what you need to make your life work. And you alone have to do this. What do you need? Because if you don't know what you need, you're not going to make the change. If you know what you need, then start a program. And each day, put into that life one more of those needs. For example, Franco Pantone, who race walks with me back there, this morning I saw he had 6-pound ankle weights on. I said, Franco, what are the 6-pound ankle weights? And he said, I want to get stronger in my push-off. I said, why? He said, because in the last 2 years, I haven't been able to get that much faster, and this is what I need. He saw there was a limitation. He wanted to go beyond the limitation instead of just being frustrated and giving up, as most people would. He was adaptive and creative enough to know that something else would help. Now it's helping. He's going faster. So look at what you need. Do you need to go back to school? Do you need other support systems? Do you need other people to help you in your changes? If so, find them. Establish hearty, balanced goals, realistic goals. Fantasy is fine, but never let it take the place of reality. And the expectation of what you think you're going to have to do to get where you want to get is always going to be impeding you. So don't let expectations stop you. When I know I got to go out and get a job done, whether it's making a documentary, writing a book, doing a class, doing a workshop like this, I don't have expectations. I absolutely don't. Because could you imagine if I started thinking, oh my God, a documentary, I got to come up with $300,000. I then got to get a camera crew. I got to get everyone to agree. They're not going to agree because I'm going to be dealing with pro and con, and part is going to say yes, part is going to say no. They're going to be in conflict. Oh, and then I'm not going to be able to get it on the air. Who's going to want to put it on the air? I'm too controversial a figure. The topic is too extreme. Americans don't want to hear this. I would just then be living with it up here. But instead, I said, no expectations. I'm going to make a documentary on AIDS. What do I need? I need people who've been successfully treated. I put the call out. I went looking. Los Angeles, New York, San Diego. I found people who've been successfully treated for AIDS. I need doctors. I found the doctors. I didn't have any money. I put the call out. I asked people. Roland Marconi and others came forward and helped. For $34,000, I was able to do a documentary that someone else would have had to spend $300,000 on. And I tried and tried to get it on the air. And then I talked with a friend of mine, and that friend tried and got it on. So instead of anticipating and making my attitude and beliefs not happen because of anticipating what could happen and what would go wrong, I just did it. Just do it. And put into it what you need. And that's how you got to start this process. If you start anticipating everything, nothing will ever get done. So plan your goals, make them realistic, make them achievable, and try to have them each month so you can reassess where you're at in a month. Then affirm your new self every day. Get up in the morning and look in the mirror and be happy with what you see. And say, I'm happy with who I am. I'm growing. I'm learning. I'm doing something today. And every single day do at least one thing that you wouldn't have done otherwise. Do something new each day. Whatever it is. Something new. Even how you treat people or how you address or how you eat. Anything. Change something each day. Relinquish old patterns. Take one old pattern that you don't want anymore and give it up. Just don't let it back in your life. When it starts coming back, say, no, I've got something to take its place. And the more you keep reaffirming the new and getting rid of the old that doesn't work, in time, that becomes your new pattern. Create or join new support teams. Wherever you need to be helped, there are people out there willing to help you. We've got a lot of very fine people in this country who have gone through crisis, survived them, are stronger, self-affirmed, and are willing to share that with you. Look at senior citizens. They are incredibly supportive. I've yet to meet any of the senior citizens I've ever talked to who weren't willing to give you patience, compassion, understanding, and insight. They're our greatest natural resource. Let's use them to their good and ours. They love being enjoyed and loved and appreciated, and look what they can help us with. We think it's just money. Well, if I only had more money. Want to know how many people had a lot of money, got nothing to show for it, except nothing but problems? Have a daily conversation with the old and new self and write a headline. Simple little thing I do. Each evening before I go to bed, I take a half hour and I look at the day and I look at it as how if I were not growing and I were not actualizing, I would have lived that day. Well, when this would have happened, I would have done this. I would have reacted out of ego. I'd have needed to be right. I would have persevered. But I did this. Now, how can I equate the spirit in there? Because I did it with compassion. And then write a headline for yourself each night before you go to bed. What would you like to see about yourself that night? You be the architect of that headline. Bob forgave his parents today for the abuses of a lifetime. Okay? But remember, once you write that, you got to live it. All right? And every single day, write another headline. And at the end of a year, you've got 365 headlines of how you've changed your life. And then you start looking forward each day to how you're going to change. Burn all the negative bridges behind you. We like to keep bridges open, not the negative ones. Let them go. They no longer are needed in your life. Let them go and go forward. Keep everything in realistic perspective. Don't let everything get blown out of proportion. I mean, if you want a real humbling experience, go spend some time this summer on an Indian reservation. See people who are trying to survive with almost nothing, but still trying to find life and meaning where we try to deprive it. When Grant and others came out, and Buffalo Bill came out in the 1870s and killed all their buffalo, the masculine nature looked at Earth as it. They look at it as Mother Earth. All cultures look at it as Mother Earth, birthing. What you need is birth, and it gives it to you. They honor it. All these cultures honor it. We were the only ones who dishonored it. Look at the consequences of the two actions. They lived with imperceptible change. We have radically changed it. And yet we assume we had the right because we had might. Well, might does not make right. So look at everything by honoring it. If you honor things and people, then you're not in conflict with them. And you can pull back and put it in perspective. Things don't get blown out of proportion. Reality is better than fantasy when all we do is fantasize. If all you do is think about what should happen but never do it, you got to get rid of that and start actualizing. Share your new power. If you're learning and you're growing, don't be afraid to share the positive consequences of that and look at every single negative from what you can learn positive. Remember, even in the worst of negative situations, it can strengthen you if you allow it to. Look at anything that doesn't destroy you as making you stronger. And share that with other people. Sharing is an essential part of communicating and belonging. We are a part of society. We all belong. So share the best that you are and what you've learned. That's how we grow. Connect to your higher self. If you could imagine that the decisions you make are ones that have been with a silent spiritual witness, I think that you would have more compassion and sensitivity, more honor, less fear. Just always imagine that beside you, and this is true of most of the heroes throughout cultures, at least the spiritual heroes, not the warrior heroes, that everything they do because they have the strength of knowing that they are doing it with a consciousness that is higher than themselves. They are connected to a deeper, more essential meaning of life. Therefore, they're not afraid of the sacrifices they make. Look at Gandhi and look at Martin Luther King. Look at all these people. They were very strong-willed people. I do not believe that they could have manifested what they did in life if they weren't spiritual. So let's believe in our spirit self and manifest it. And lastly, choose a fear to face each week. Select a fear. List your fears and then select one per week. And every single day that week, get out of your mind, get into the fear, and face it and confront it. Whether it's injustice or people that you haven't communicated with or problems or the fear of being rejected, put yourself out there. And even if you are rejected, just keep putting yourself out and putting yourself out there in whatever you do. If you're afraid of failing at something, put yourself out and fail. Better to fail and know that you still are a human being and whole than not to try at all. And when you've put all this in perspective up to this point, you have a 12-step program to begin. And then you got a life. And then it's just not in your head.